Hey, it's Melanie White here on the Sage Women podcast, and we're really thrilled to have Sarah Rusbatch with us today. Sarah is a women's health and wellness coach, accredited grey area drinking coach, and an accredited menopause coach. And through her work in her own business and with Sage Women's Health, Sarah partners with clients to offer workshops, presentations, keynote talks on alcohol and mental health, alcohol and menopause, and how to change the drinking culture in the workplace. Sarah, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
What's something good that's happened for you this week, Sarah? I have to start with that little question.
It's been a rather big week. So my book came out on Tuesday, and so it has been quite the whirlwind of radio interviews, podcast interviews, book launch party, book signings, just so much going on. And then I fly off to Sydney to do it all again over there as well. So yeah, an exciting, busy, and quite surreal week.
Yeah, I'll bet. And I love the dress that you chose for your Perth launch, by the way. The yellow one is beautiful. Just some backstory before we kick in, because I'd love to learn more about your book. But back to the very start, what made you want to change your relationship with alcohol?
I think for me, what I really noticed as soon as I got to the age of 40, alcohol started impacting me in a way that it never had before. So I'd always been a reasonably heavy drinker. I partied a lot in my 20s, but I kind of wore my ability to drink as my badge of honor. It was I was never the one that was lying on the sofa the next day dying. I was like, come on, let's go back to the pub and have another one. My body seemed to just recover very, very well from alcohol back in those days, and quite a busy social life, a lot of traveling. I worked in London for 10 years, and my drinking had definitely changed after having kids. I think we do live in a culture where alcohol is marketed and suggested as a form of self-care and reward for tired, busy, overwhelmed mums. And I definitely fell for that and felt it. I would finish the day working, juggling two young kids, living on the other side of the world to any family support. And my reward, my time, was that drink that I would have of an evening. But what I noticed was, once I got into my 40s, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this in a minute, the way that my body was metabolizing alcohol was completely different to how it had been in my 20s. And what this meant was my mental health started to really struggle. I was crippled with anxiety for a couple of days after a big drinking session. Alcohol was really impacting my sleep. I went to my naturopath, and he said to me, your estrogen is so high, it's off the chart. You need to stop drinking. But I had no idea why alcohol was linked to estrogen. And so I was kind of like, yeah, whatever, I'll get round to that one day.
Yeah.
But then eventually it got to the point where alcohol, it was taking more than it was giving. And it was time for me to make a change.
That's a big journey for you to go on.
It was a big journey, and it didn't happen overnight, Mel. Like, it was, I took my first break from alcohol in 2017. So I was 41, and I'd had a couple of incidents that had really scared me with my drinking, and how much I'd drunk, and the memory loss and the blackout that I was getting when I drank. And so I took a break, and I thought, I'll do 21 days. They say it takes 21 days to change a habit. So I'll take 21 days off booze, and then everything will be fine. But I actually ended up doing 100 days because I couldn't believe the difference in, firstly, my mental health. Like, the anxiety pretty much disappeared within a couple of days. I felt more positive. I had more mental clarity. I was sleeping really well. So then I was waking up in the morning more energized, feeling more positive, feeling proud that I had managed another day of not drinking. Like, all of this was just reinforcing again that the feeling that I was getting, that, wow, this is great without alcohol. But after I got to 100 days, I was like, yeah, but I can't never drink again, because that would just be weird, because we live in a society that tells us that we should be able to moderate our drinking, and you're missing out if you don't have that glass of wine with your steak dinner or whatever. And so I thought, right, I'll go back, and now I will drink, but I'll drink like normal people, and I'll just have a glass of wine a couple of times a week, and that will be it. But the problem for me and for many of the women that I work with is moderation isn't a thing for me. It's not something that comes easily for me. And there's a whole load of neuroscience around the brain and alcohol and addiction and everything like that as well. And what I very quickly realized was it was easier to have none than it was to have one. And after 2 years, it took me 2 years of backwards and forwards, taking breaks, going back to drinking, taking breaks, going back to drinking, hating who I was when I was drinking, loving who I was when I was sober, having this constant battle in my head. And then finally, April 2019, I had my last drink.
Wow. And you remember the day?
27th of April, 2019. Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah, as we were coming into this session, I was reflecting on conversations I've had with people, and I know someone that an ex-client of mine who talked about at lunchtime debating with herself as to whether she was going to have a drink that night. It's not as easy as 21 days it'll be fixed, right? Because we have all of these thought processes and patterns in our daily life, and then you think, oh, well, if I don't have a drink then, and my husband or my partner is, then that's going to be weird. Like, there's all these little situations that you have to deal with, and you just alluded to that, going out socially. How do you manage that? How do I fit in?
Yeah. And when you've identified yourself as, I was Sarah the party girl. I was Sarah whose house everyone came to for drinks before we went out. I was the house that everyone came back to after the pub. And so trying to kind of, it takes a whole lot of work to actually recreate and rediscover who you actually are without alcohol.
And that's your program that you run, isn't it? Rediscovering Me.
Yeah. So I support women, first of all, to take the break from alcohol and to get a bit of time under their belts of not drinking in a supportive community with other women. And then we go on and do some of that work of, but what do I use for stress if it's not my evening wine? What do I do to have fun if it's not going to the pub with my girlfriends? What do I do to add into my life so I create a more fulfilling, interesting, purposeful life if I've taken alcohol out?
And that must have been a big step for you. I mean, you said you were the party girl and everyone came to your place before going out. That was your identity, and that you have to make a huge identity shift to become a non-drinker then. Well, I'm guessing you do. I mean, how did you navigate that? How did your life change?
I was very careful to make sure that I still maintained connections and I still did things, but I was careful about what I went to, Mel, because it turns out it's not that fun going to a pub and watching everyone else get drunk if you're not drinking. And so,
oh, really?
Yeah, it turns
yeah,
out.
I know.
So I would just start saying no to things I didn't want to go to and start being curious about trying new things that I did want to go to. And I set up a meetup group for women in Perth who were also sober so that I could make some friends with other women on that path as well. And so through that, we did a coast trek walk, that 35k walk down in Margaret River. We were training for these walks. We were doing ice baths. We started doing saunas. I became interested in breath work, in yoga, and all sorts of things that I just had initially thought, oh, that's too woo-woo. That's, like, that's what boring people do. But in actual what I discovered was I loved it.
Yeah, amazing. And it might sound like a silly question, but how many women do you think of midlife age are struggling with alcohol in Australia right now?
I wouldn't even know the numbers, but I would say it's a lot. A lot.
If,
I would say so many more than we think. I think I've shared with you before, I did one article in Mamma Mia, and 8,000 women reached out to me on the back of reading one article, and they all said, you've just told my story. Because my story is not one of, I was an end stage physically dependent alcoholic. My story is I was a grey area drinker. And most people have not heard that term before. And they think that you're either an alcoholic or you're just okay. But in actual fact, there's a gradient and there's a scale. And the women I work with are sitting in that middle. And they're saying that middle-aged women is the only demographic in Australia where alcohol use disorder is going up and not down.
Yeah, and you wonder why that is. And I think of all the clients that I've had in coaching, but people I know as well, I would guess that it's maybe 80% of women in midlife are struggling at some level with alcohol. When you think about the responsibilities of elderly parents and kids leaving school and being at the peak of your career and all of the stresses that we're facing, and then thinking that the old method of coping with that is going to serve us. But then we have this big hormonal disruption, which pretty much you can't do what you used to be able to do. And that's what you mentioned earlier. It's massive, isn't it?
It is. I think it's twofold. I think that the women in midlife are probably more stressed at this age than has been for any other generation because of what they're juggling. And also we've got a very, very high budget alcohol industry that have been deliberately targeting women and selling this idea of alcohol as self-care and as a reward for the last 20 odd years. And so you've got the two working in tandem, where women are really stressed and overwhelmed, and then big alcohol's coming in and going, but it's okay, we've got the solution for you. And so of course we turn to that solution, because in the short term alcohol works. It's just in the long term it doesn't.
It's so interesting, the marketing. And somebody told me once that they invested in alcohol companies because when times are good, people drink to celebrate, and when times are bad, people drink to commiserate. I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Insane. I think during COVID, alcohol sales, I know, were through the roof, and alcohol bottle shops were listed as an essential service. And yeah, alcohol is one of only 3 substances that the human body can die from withdrawal from. And we're just selling it, and it's highly addictive, causes 7 types of cancer, is a really big contributor to breast cancer in women. And yet no one's talking about that.
Yeah, and they say there's now, according to the guidelines, no safe alcohol intake.
Yeah.
So speaking of chronic disease, we're kind of getting into the realm of the effects of alcohol, but particularly around menopause. How does alcohol affect women in menopause?
So something that lots of women don't realise is we actually have a shrinking liver. So from our late 30s onwards, our liver volume starts shrinking. And we, as women anyway, we produce less of an enzyme called ALDH, alcohol dehydrogenase, which is the enzyme that breaks down and metabolizes alcohol to get it out of our body as quickly as possible. Women have less of this enzyme than men, which just means from day one, women cannot metabolize alcohol as efficiently as men. So women are more vulnerable to the health risks of alcohol than men are. We then throw in the added fact that women, as we age, the level of ALDH that we produce, which was low anyway, gets lower because of the changes in our liver and the changes with menopause. And so as we are aging, we simply cannot metabolize alcohol in the way in our 40s or 50s in the way that we did in our 20s. The other thing is that alcohol plays a big part in hot flushes. So for women who are struggling with hot flushes, alcohol causes us to heat up. And so for anyone that's got hot flushes, if we're having a glass of wine at night, that's only going to exacerbate them even more. And then I'm sure your listeners may or may not know this, but as we are aging, we produce, our levels of progesterone drop, and progesterone is directly linked to GABA. And GABA is the neurotransmitter that helps us to feel calm and helps us to feel relaxed. And if we've got less of that, we're feeling more anxious and we're feeling more on edge. Alcohol initially causes us to have an effect of GABA in the body. So when we first have a drink, we feel calm and relaxed. But the problem is our brain wants a balance of all our neurotransmitters. And to combat this big surge that it gets from the alcohol, our brain releases cortisol, the stress hormone. So women think that they are combating their stress and anxiety by having a drink. But what we now know is that we're making ourselves more stressed and anxious. And people who drink even just a couple of glasses of wine 3 or 4 times a week have a higher baseline of cortisol in their body than people who don't drink at all. So we're actually making ourselves more stressed and anxious by drinking, even though we're using it for our stress and anxiety. And so it's just this ridiculous vicious circle.
And then that leads into sleep, right? I mean, I did some work with a sleep company, and we looked at a cohort of people, and those that were drinking had much more disrupted sleep, had higher blood pressure and all sorts of other things overnight. And then you start the next day behind the 8 ball because you have that extra stressor of not sleeping, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so when we consume alcohol, even just a really small amount, when we go to sleep, we now know that we go through sleep cycles, and every sleep cycle includes light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep. REM sleep is the cycle of sleep that is where we're dreaming. And it's really, we now know the science shows that this is very important that we get this level of sleep for preventing Alzheimer's and dementia, for preventing heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and we generally have between 5 and 7 sleep cycles a night on a normal night. When we drink alcohol, we bypass the REM stage. So on any given night, the body needs 5 to 7 cycles of sleep, including REM. Even if we just have 1 or 2 drinks, at most we'll get 1 or 2 cycles with REM sleep. So the impact on our brain health, even, the next day, sometimes I would have a drink and I would be like, oh, I don't feel hungover, I just feel tired. And that is because even if you've just had 1 or 2 drinks, you don't get true restorative sleep.
Yeah, I've had this experience myself, even going into perimenopause a few years ago. 1 glass of wine, I would feel incredibly anxious the next day. I would wake up at midnight and be awake until 5 a.m, wired up, low mood, panic attacks during the night, heart racing, all of that stuff. And on the days I didn't drink, there would be a vast difference.
Yeah.
Incredible.
It's insane because so many women notice this and yet they still drink.
Yeah, and I started to ask myself the question, if I'm feeling like that and the impact of 1 glass of wine is all that during the night and all of the next day and beyond, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I think that a lot of the time it's peer pressure, it's our beliefs around alcohol. It's, we live in a society that's very alcohol centric, and where people, I had a client who had stopped drinking. She was going so well. I think she was on 3 months and she was out, and one of her friends turned around to her and went, oh, are you still not drinking? When did you get so boring? And it's just like, when are we going to start supporting people that make this really positive health change? If we said to someone had stopped smoking, we would say, well done, good on you. But if someone says they've stopped drinking, the peer pressure can just be astonishing. I had a client at a work Christmas party this year, and she had gone to the work Christmas party. She wasn't drinking. She was so proud of herself. She'd started with me on the 1st of October. This was the middle of December, so she was 2.5 months sober. And one of her colleagues said, oh, for goodness sake, are you still not drinking? And she was like, no, I'm going fine. I feel really good. I'll just have a mocktail. I'll have an alcohol-free gin and tonic. So her colleague went to the bar, deliberately ordered the alcohol version, didn't tell my client, wanted to trick her into having alcohol, came back with the drink, told her it was a mocktail and it was the alcohol-free version. And it was only that another colleague said to my client, she's lying, she got you the alcoholic version, that my client didn't drink it. And what is wrong with our society that people think that's okay?
That's an incredible story. I mean, who does that and why? What would be the purpose? It just doesn't make sense. It makes me think of someone I know that was on an alcohol-free program she was losing weight. It wasn't the main focus, but for that period she wasn't drinking. And basically a friendship broke up because of it, because they were used to having dinner parties every second weekend. And that person said, well, if you're not drinking, then what's wrong with you? Why not? And we can't be friends. And they didn't speak to each other for 5 years. They'd been friends for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's insane. But I think people I think the people that have a problem with someone not drinking generally have a problem with drinking, because if it's that much of an issue for you that someone is going to spend time with you and they're not drinking, that person needs to look at their own drinking.
Yeah, and that leads me into asking you about the book. You've obviously been working in this space for a few years now. You've got a lot of experience. You've had thousands of people that you've helped, and I've met several of them who are just so happy with having made that change. You decided to write a book, which is a huge undertaking. Why a book and why now?
What I noticed was missing in the space. There's so many brilliant sober books out there, so many. but they seem to fall into two categories. There's memoirs, so there's lots of stories of people whose drinking got terrible, they hit rock bottom, this is how they came out of sobriety, and they're brilliantly inspiring stories. Or there are how to quit alcohol in 30 days type books. So lots of ones about how to deal with cravings, how to, get through those first initial periods of not drinking. But what I noticed was missing was not how to get sober, but how to stay sober. So how to create a life where you don't want or need to drink. And I wrote this book for women because all the time I ask women, I've got a community of 16,000 now, and I said, why do you drink, or why did you drink? And there were 3 reasons. And those reasons were boredom, stress, and loneliness. And I wanted to address those 3 reasons in this book to support women. Because if you want to escape your life every day because you're bored, stressed, or lonely, we've got to work on that. And then if we work on that, you don't need the alcohol because you don't want to escape your life anymore. So it's a book about how to create a life you love. It's what to do for fun, what to do for your interest, how to manage your stress, what to do if you're bored every night of the week, how to increase your energy so you've got the energy to go and do new things, how to sober socialize if you're, going out and meeting new people. So it's a real guide for women in that midlife era for how to go on to create a life that they love so they're not needing to turn to alcohol every day.
Gosh, it's really sad to think of women feeling bored, stressed, and lonely, and all they've got to turn to is alcohol, or that's the first thing that they turn to.
And the problem is, when we do that, it perpetuates the problem because it just makes us retreat even more. They've done neuroscience now on Huberman Lab podcast on alcohol. He says that they've done studies on the human brain to see people who drink regularly are less open to change. They become very habitual and they will only do things. This is what I do, and this is just who I do it with. And their life, like I would say, in the last 5 years of my drinking, I stayed so stagnant in my life. I didn't grow or evolve as a person because I wasn't doing anything different. And when women, they want different, but they think the alcohol is helping them, but all that's doing is keeping them small, keeping their lives small, keeping themselves stuck. And that's what I really hope comes across in this book, is how much is out there in this incredible, big, wonderful world for us to go and explore if we just give ourselves the confidence, the time, the mental clarity to be able to go and do that.
And thinking about the way you described the book market for sobriety earlier and the gap, I can imagine that, yes, great, 30 days to giving up alcohol, but there's all of those things that we discussed earlier around your identity. Well, I'm not the party girl anymore. Well, I'm not this, I'm not that. Like, suddenly you've got all this free time that you're not spending drinking or recovering from drinking or feeling sick or bad or mentally down. What do you do with all that time?
Yeah.
If people don't know who they are and how they want to spend their time, it must be incredibly difficult. And it sounds like you've developed something, a resource for people to really get clear on how they want to be in future, on what they want to do instead of drinking, on how they want to spend all of that time that they invested in drinking and related after effects. What do I do with all that time if I'm not doing that?
Exactly. And that's exactly why I wrote this book, because so many of the women I coach, I say to them, well, what do you love doing? Like, outside of getting pissed, what do you actually love doing? And they would look at me with tears in their eyes and just be like, I don't know. Because all I've done for the last 10 years is go to work, raise my kids, clean the house, look after other people, and wine has been my me time at the end of the day, and I don't know what else I want to do. And so I gently take them on a journey of experimentation. Well, let's go and start. And that's what happens in the book. I start suggesting, maybe we could do this, or what about adding this in? And there's a checklist of all the things that I tried at the start. And it's not about saying, oh, because I liked that, you'll like it. But it is about starting to experiment and going, well, how do I feel if I get up earlier in the morning and I go to that gym class? Does that change my mood for the day? Do I have more energy? Like, really starting to be curious and experiment. And that's the key to all of this. But I find when women are drinking, definitely the case for me was I lost so much confidence, because when you're feeling anxious all the time and you're feeling tired all the time because you're not sleeping well, it's beyond your possibility in that moment to go, oh, I'm going to try a new hobby. I'm going to walk into a room with loads of people I don't know and put myself out there. That just feels too hard. The easy option is to stay at home and have a drink. Whereas when we do stop drinking over time, we grow with confidence because we feel proud, because you wake up in the morning and your first thought is not, oh, you loser, you drank again last night when you said you wouldn't. Instead, your first thought is, ah, look at you go. You've done another night alcohol free. This feels good today. What else could I do today? And we start to get that confidence.
Yeah, it really opens up possibilities when you are able to achieve something, even if it's 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights without drinking, then what else could I do? What could be possible? It sounds like it's a very quick way. I don't want to say it's a quick fix, but a quick way to build confidence is actually the not drinking of its in and of itself, to then explore, well, what else am I capable of?
Yeah, I did a workshop with someone the other day, and she's a women's empowerment coach, and we were talking about the quickest way to build self-belief, because a lot of us, you know, the internal narrative is, I can't do that, I won't be able to do that. And she was saying the number one quickest way to start doing that is keeping promises to yourself, even if it's the smallest of promises. Because if you always break your promises, then the internal dialogue is pretty awful. If it's, I'm not going to drink tonight, but then at 5 o'clock you're drinking, and then at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock the next morning when you get up, how are you going to be feeling about yourself? You're going to be feeling shocking because you've done the thing you didn't want to do. Whereas if you've said to yourself, I'm not going to drink tonight, and you don't, you start to feel so proud, and then your self-belief grows.
So simple, and yet it's not that easy. And I'm sure that having a book to lean on and having a support group like the one that you offer and the programs that you offer really help people to take those steps, because some people are more confident than others naturally, and others need more support. And just on that, I am curious to know, of the people that you work with, how good are their support systems generally? You may or may not have a sense of that, but I'm just kind of curious, because I've worked with women in weight loss before and say, who's supporting you? And they say, oh, nobody, just me.
Yeah.
I think, really? That's a bummer.
That's often the case, Mel, because I find grey area drinkers tend to surround themselves with other grey area drinkers, because then your point of reference becomes, well, I just drink like everyone around me. And, you know, when I was drinking, I tended to surround myself with other drinkers because I didn't want to be with someone who wasn't drinking, because then that made me feel bad about my drinking. And so we've often got into that kind of scenario. And the other thing is our relationships. Like, I have a lot of like women who are really worried about their relationship because their partner drinks a lot and they don't know what to do. How are they going to connect with their partner? That's their ritual of connection each evening. And I've got an entire chapter in the book on how I navigated this, and tools and tips and strategies for this, because it's one of the hardest things, because it's not our job. You know, if we decide I want to stop drinking, we can't turn around to our partner and go, you have to as well, because I am. Like, that's entirely their decision. But it does change the relationship if you've both been quite big drinkers and then one of you stops. And so I've put a lot in the book about that as well.
I'm really excited to read it. And before we wrap up today, I'm curious to know what your vision is for this book.
I'd love to see it on every nightstand of every middle-aged woman across Australia. What I really want, Mel, is I don't want people to think that they've got to have a problem with alcohol to pick up this book, because it's not about that. Like, everyone says to me, how much were you drinking? Because they want to know, what's the number that means I've got a problem? And I'm like, the answer to that question is not a number. The answer to that question is a feeling. How is alcohol making you feel? And for some of the women I work with, they're having 1 or 2 glasses of wine a night, or 3 or 4 nights a week. And that 1 or 2 glasses is making them feel pretty awful. But they're really finding it hard to just stop that 1 or 2. Because if we're only having that little amount, we think, oh, I don't have a problem because I'm not drinking too much. But it's not about the number. I also have clients that are drinking 2 bottles a night. It kind of just doesn't matter. It is about, how's it making you feel? And if you have any kind of inkling or suspicion that you've been relying on alcohol as a crutch in some way, and it's your go-to for managing stress, when the kids are being naughty, when you've had an argument with your husband, when your boss is doing your head in, you know, when any of those things are happening, your go-to is, oh, I just need to go home and have a drink, then pick up this book, because it's full of so many tools and strategies that really can support women to not be turning to alcohol for that crutch.
That's amazing, Sarah. And we're going to do what we can to help you get the book out there. Now, I believe it is sold out at the moment.
Oh no, it's in bookshops all over Australia. It's just currently sold out on Amazon, but apparently my publisher is working on this as we speak, so that will be replenished. So it's in all the bookstores around Australia and New Zealand at the moment. It's on Booktopia. You can order it from Dimmicks. It comes out in the UK on Thursday, and it comes out in America the following week. So definitely can get your hands on it. Hopefully by the time this goes to air, it will be back in stock in Amazon.
Excellent. Well, I love your vision of getting it onto every middle-aged woman's nightstand or midlife woman's nightstand in Australia. And I'm just going to one-up you and say, I hope it gets the same reach in America and Europe as well. Let's see what you can do.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being on the podcast today, Sarah. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.